In the scorching heat of Afghanistan, when bullets were flying and hope was running thin, the most unlikely hero emerged from the shadows. She was barely 5 feet tall, weighed less than most soldiers' gear, and had been told countless times that she didn't belong on the battlefield. But on that fateful day in 2018, when an elite SEAL team found themselves trapped behind enemy lines with no way out, it was her finger on the trigger that meant the difference between life and death. This is the story of Sarah Chen, the sniper they said was too small, too weak, and too different to save lives. They were wrong. Dead wrong. What happened in those mountains didn't just prove her critics wrong. It rewrote the rules of modern warfare and showed the world that heroes come in all sizes. Sometimes the smallest person in the room has the biggest impact, and sometimes being underestimated is the greatest advantage of all. This is her story. This is how a rejected recruit became a legend. The rain hammered against the windows of the Army recruitment office in Seattle as Sarah Chen sat in the hard plastic chair, her soaked sneakers squeaking against the polished floor. At 19 years old, she barely reached 5 feet 2 and weighed just over 100 pounds. The recruiting sergeant, a mountain of a man named Thompson, looked down at her with barely concealed skepticism. "Miss Chen," he began, flipping through her paperwork with thick fingers. "I have to ask again. Are you sure you want to pursue a combat role? The Army has many excellent support positions that would be more suitable for someone with your physical characteristics." Sarah's jaw tightened. She had heard this same speech from 4 different recruiters across 3 different branches of the military. Her small frame and soft-spoken demeanor seemed to automatically disqualify her in their minds before she even opened her mouth. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been shooting competitively since she was 12 years old. Her grandfather, a Korean War veteran, had taught her on his small ranch outside Spokane. She could hit a target at 600 yards with consistency that would make most soldiers jealous. "Sergeant Thompson," she said quietly, "I want to be a sniper. I know I can do it." Thompson's eyebrows shot up, and he actually laughed. Not a cruel laugh, but the kind of chuckle reserved for children who announced they wanted to be astronauts or princesses. "Sweetheart, do you have any idea what it takes to be a military sniper? We're talking about carrying 60 pounds of gear through hostile territory, lying motionless for hours in extreme conditions, and making life or death decisions under pressure. The physical demands alone would..." "Would what?" Sarah interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "I've been hunting and shooting my entire life. I can outshoot most of the men who've walked through that door." "Give me a chance to prove it." Thompson set down the papers and leaned back in his chair. He had been a recruiter for 8 years and had seen all types come through his office. There were the overconfident jocks who thought their high school football success would automatically translate to military glory. There were the video game enthusiasts who had confused Call of Duty with real warfare. And then there were the quiet ones like Sarah, who carried themselves with a confidence that didn't match their appearance. Something in her eyes made him pause. They weren't the eyes of a naive teenager with romantic notions about military service. They were steady, focused, and held a determination that he had learned to recognize in successful soldiers. Still, he had his orders and his experience. The military was changing, slowly, but the special operations community remained largely closed to women, especially women who looked like they could be blown away by a strong wind. "Miss Chen," he said more gently, "even if you could qualify physically, which is a big if, the sniper program is extremely competitive. We're talking about the best of the best. The dropout rate is over 70%, and that's for candidates who already meet all the physical requirements. I'm not trying to discourage you from serving your country, but I think you need to be realistic about your capabilities." Sarah had expected this response. She had researched everything about military sniper programs, from the Army Special Operations Target Interdiction course to the Marine Corps Scout Sniper program. She knew the statistics, the requirements, and the challenges. She also knew something that Sergeant Thompson couldn't see from her paperwork or her appearance. She had been preparing for this her entire life. Growing up as the daughter of Chinese immigrants in rural Washington, Sarah had learned early that she would always be underestimated. Her father worked 16-hour days at his small electronics repair shop, while her mother cleaned offices at night to make ends meet. They had sacrificed everything for the American dream, and Sarah was determined not to let their sacrifice be in vain. Her grandfather, her mother's father, had been different from her quiet, hard-working parents. Master Sergeant James Kim had served 2 tours in Korea and came home with stories that fascinated young Sarah. But more than the stories, it was his philosophy that shaped her. "Size doesn't matter in war," he would tell her as they practiced shooting behind his small house. Accuracy matters, patience matters, heart matters. The enemy can't see how big you are when the bullet hits them from half a mile away. Under his guidance, Sarah had developed skills that went far beyond simple marksmanship. She learned to read wind patterns by watching how grass moved in the distance. She practiced breath control until she could slow her heart rate at will. She studied ballistics, weather patterns, and human psychology. By the time she was 16, she was competing in long-range shooting competitions and consistently placing in the top 10 against much older, more experienced shooters. But none of this was visible to Sergeant Thompson as he looked at the small Asian woman sitting across from his desk. All he saw was liability, a potential headline about the Army pushing unqualified candidates into dangerous situations to meet diversity quotas. "Look," he said finally, "I'll be straight with you. Even if I wanted to put you forward for infantry, which I don't recommend, you'd have to pass the same physical fitness tests as everyone else. No modifications, no special consideration. That means carrying a full combat load, completing obstacle courses designed for much larger people, and proving you can handle yourself in hand-to-hand combat situations. The numbers just aren't in your favor." Sarah had been preparing for this moment for months. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder filled with certificates, competition results, and photographs. She spread them across Thompson's desk methodically. "This is me winning the Washington State Long-Range Championship last year," she said, pointing to a photo of herself holding a trophy that was nearly half her height. "This is my qualification card from the National Rifle Association's High Master classification. And these," she continued, spreading out a series of target sheets, "are my groups from 600, 800, and 1,000 yards." Thompson picked up the target sheets and studied them. The bullet holes were clustered so tightly that in some cases they formed single ragged holes. He had seen plenty of targets over the years, and these were exceptional by any standard. "I'm not saying you can't shoot," he admitted. "But shooting at a range and shooting in combat are two completely different things. In combat, people are shooting back. There's stress, fatigue, fear. You're not just hitting targets, you're taking human lives. The psychological pressure alone has broken soldiers twice your size." "My grandfather killed 17 enemy soldiers during the Korean War," Sarah said quietly. "He was 5'4" and weighed 130 pounds. He always said that being small was an advantage for a sniper. Smaller profile, easier to hide, less gear to carry. The enemy looks for big soldiers, not small ones." Thompson was beginning to realize that this conversation wasn't going as he had expected. The young woman sitting across from him wasn't backing down or accepting his gentle redirects towards safer military occupations. If anything, she was becoming more determined with each objection he raised. "Miss Chen," he said, trying a different approach. "Let's say, hypothetically, that you could meet all the physical requirements. Let's say you could carry the gear, complete the training, and earn your way into a sniper program. Are you prepared for what comes next? Are you prepared to kill people? Because that's what snipers do. They don't wound, they kill. They kill from long range, often without the target even knowing they're there. It's not like the movies. It's cold, calculated, and final, and you have to live with it for the rest of your life." For the first time since entering his office, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. She looked out the rain-streaked window at the Seattle skyline, thinking about her grandfather's stories. He had never glorified what he had done during the war, but he had never apologized for it either. He had served his country, protected his fellow soldiers, and helped end a conflict that threatened the freedom of an entire nation. "Sergeant," she said finally, "my grandparents fled North Korea with nothing but the clothes on their backs. They watched friends and family die under communist rule. My grandfather fought to stop that from spreading. If I can serve my country and protect American soldiers the way he protected his fellow Marines, then yes, I'm prepared to do whatever that requires." Thompson studied her for a long moment. In 8 years of recruiting, he had developed a sense for who would succeed in the military and who would wash out. This small woman sitting across from him had something that couldn't be taught: unwavering determination. But determination alone wasn't enough to overcome the physical realities of modern warfare. "Here's what I'm willing to do," he said finally. "I'll schedule you for the initial fitness assessment. If you can pass the same tests we give to every infantry candidate with no modifications or allowances, then we can talk about moving forward. But I want you to understand that this isn't just about proving me wrong. If you wash out during training, it goes on your permanent record. It could affect your ability to serve in any capacity." Sarah stood up, and even at her full height, she barely reached Thompson's chest as he rose from his chair, but there was nothing small about the confidence in her voice when she replied, "I understand the risks, Sergeant. Schedule the test. GB, I'll be ready." As she walked out of the recruitment office into the Seattle drizzle, Sarah knew that she had won only the first small battle in what would be a long war. The fitness test would be just the beginning. If she passed that, there would be basic training, advanced individual training, and then the grueling selection process for sniper school. At each step, there would be instructors, fellow soldiers, and commanders who would look at her the same way Sergeant Thompson had looked at her, with doubt, skepticism, and the assumption that she didn't belong. But Sarah had learned something important that day. She had learned that her greatest strength wasn't her shooting ability or her knowledge of ballistics. It was her refusal to accept other people's limitations. Every time someone told her she was too small, too weak, or too different, they were actually giving her valuable intelligence about their own prejudices and blind spots. And in warfare, intelligence was everything. The rain continued to fall as Sarah walked to her car, but for the first time in months, she felt like the sun was shining. She had work to do. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through the darkness of the Fort Benning barracks at 4:30 a.m., but Sarah Chen had been awake for 20 minutes already. While her fellow recruits groaned and stumbled out of their bunks, she was already dressed and ready for another day of proving herself. 3 months into basic training, she had learned that being first was often the only way to avoid being last in the eyes of their drill instructors. "Chen!" Drill Sergeant Martinez's voice boomed across the barracks. "You're on point for morning PT. Try not to hold everyone else back." Sarah bit back her response and fell into formation. She had learned early in training that arguing with drill instructors was pointless, even when they were wrong. Especially when they were wrong. Every interaction was a test, and every test was an opportunity to prove that she belonged here. The morning physical training was a familiar routine by now, a 3-mile run followed by push-ups, sit-ups, and pull-ups. What had started as a personal struggle had become Sarah's daily domination. While larger recruits huffed and puffed through the run, her smaller frame and efficient running style kept her near the front of the pack. During strength exercises, she had developed techniques that maximized her leverage and minimized her disadvantages. But it was during the combat skills training that Sarah truly began to separate herself from her peers. The Army's new combat fitness test had replaced the old push-up and sit-up focused assessment with functional movements that better reflected battlefield demands. The test included a 300-meter sprint in full gear, ammunition can lifts, and a grueling obstacle course that tested both strength and agility. On the day of their final combat fitness assessment, Sarah lined up with her squad as Drill Sergeant Rodriguez explained the scoring system. "Listen up, recruits. This isn't about passing or failing anymore. Your scores here will determine your military occupational specialty options. High scores open doors, low scores close them." "Chen," he said, looking directly at her, "your requested MOS requires a minimum score of 540 out of 600 points. No pressure." Sarah's stomach tightened. A 540 score put her in the top 10% of all soldiers, male or female. It was a standard that had been designed when military planners assumed that only large, physically imposing soldiers would be attempting combat roles. The first event was the 3-repetition maximum deadlift. Sarah watched as soldier after soldier approached the hex bar, loaded with weights. The bigger men were lifting 340 pounds or more, earning maximum points. When her turn came, Sarah stepped up to a bar loaded with 200 pounds. It represented more than twice her body weight. She had spent countless hours in the gym preparing for this moment, not just building strength, but perfecting her technique. As she gripped the bar, she could hear whispered comments from other recruits about whether she would even be able to lift it off the ground. Sarah took a deep breath, engaged her core, and drove through her legs. The bar rose smoothly. 1 repetition. She reset, focused, and lifted again. 2 repetitions. On the 3rd lift, she could feel the weight of everyone's expectations as much as the iron in her hands. The bar rose more slowly this time, but it rose steadily until she stood fully upright. "Time," called Drill Sergeant Rodriguez. 200 pounds. Not bad, Chen. It wasn't maximum points, but it was respectable. More importantly, it proved that she could meet the minimum strength requirements for combat duty. The standing power throw came next. Soldiers had to hurl a 10-pound medicine ball backwards over their heads as far as possible. Sarah had studied the biomechanics of this movement extensively, learning that technique could often overcome raw strength. While other recruits relied on brute force, Sarah used her entire body like a catapult, generating power from her legs and core. Her throw sailed 12.5 meters, earning her maximum points and surprised looks from the drill instructors. Several male recruits who had thrown with obvious effort had achieved shorter distances. The hand release push-ups were next, And this was where Sarah's training methodology paid the biggest dividends. Instead of trying to build massive upper body strength, she had focused on muscular endurance and perfect form. While other recruits struggled through their repetitions with deteriorating technique, Sarah maintained textbook form throughout all 60 repetitions, earning another maximum score. The sprint drag carry event was designed to simulate moving under fire, dragging wounded soldiers, and carrying ammunition. It was arguably the most combat-relevant portion of the test, and it was where Sarah's critics expected her to fail. The event required soldiers to sprint 50 meters, drag a 90-pound sled another 50 meters, perform a lateral shuffle while carrying two 40-pound kettlebells, drag the sled back, and sprint again. Sarah had spent weeks analyzing this event, breaking it down into components and optimizing each one. During the sled drags, she stayed low and used her legs, rather than trying to overpower the weight with her back. During the lateral shuffles, she took shorter, quicker steps that maintained her momentum. Her time of 1 minute and 45 seconds earned her near maximum points and left several drill instructors shaking their heads in amazement. The leg tuck event tested core strength and grip endurance. Hanging from a pull-up bar, soldiers had to bring their knees to their elbows repeatedly. Sarah's gymnastics background and rock climbing hobby had prepared her well for this challenge. She completed 20 repetitions, far exceeding the maximum score requirement. Finally came the 2-mile run, the last event and often the most decisive. Sarah had always been a strong distance runner, but running in full combat gear was different from running in shorts and a t-shirt. The additional weight changed everything about her stride and breathing. As the group set out on a measured course around Fort Benning, Sarah settled into a pace that felt sustainable. She had learned in previous runs that starting too fast would cause her to fade in the final mile. Around her, larger soldiers who had dominated the strength events were beginning to struggle with the sustained cardiovascular demand. By the 1-mile mark, Sarah had moved into the top third of the group. Her breathing was controlled, her form was still solid, and she could hear the heavy footsteps and labored breathing of soldiers behind her beginning to fade. In the final half-mile, Sarah made her move. She had been holding back for this moment, conserving energy for when it would matter most. Her pace increased steadily, and she began passing soldier after soldier. Some tried to match her acceleration but couldn't sustain it. Others had nothing left to give. When Sarah crossed the finish line, only 3 other soldiers in her company had finished ahead of her. Her time of 13 minutes and 30 seconds earned maximum points and brought her total score to 500 and 60 out of 600 possible points. As she caught her breath in the cool-down area, Drill Sergeant Rodriguez approached her with her scorecard. "Chen," he said, and for the first time in 3 months, there was something other than criticism in his voice. "I owe you an apology. When you first showed up here, I thought you were going to be a problem. I thought you were going to get hurt or get someone else hurt or wash out and blame everyone but yourself. I was wrong." He handed her the scorecard. In addition to her overall score, there was a note at the bottom. Recommended for advanced individual training, Infantry MOS 11B, eligible for special schools upon completion. Special schools was military terminology for advanced training programs like Airborne School, Ranger School, and the various sniper programs. It was official recognition that Sarah had not only met the standard, but had exceeded it. That evening, Sarah called her grandfather from the payphone outside the barracks. Master Sergeant Kim listened quietly as she described her test scores and her recommendation for infantry training. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "But remember, this was just the first test. The real tests come when people are shooting back. Stay humble, keep learning, and never let success make you soft." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied. It was the same advice he had given her after every shooting competition, every small victory throughout her life. "And Sarah," her grandfather added, "remember that you're not just representing yourself out there. Every person who looks at you and sees someone who doesn't belong, you're proving them wrong not just for you, but for everyone who comes after you." As Sarah hung up the phone and walked back toward the barracks, she could see Fort Benning's lights stretching out into the Georgia night. Somewhere out there were advanced training facilities where she would learn the specific skills of infantry warfare. Beyond that were even more specialized schools where she could learn the art and science of precision shooting. She had cleared the first major hurdle, but Sarah knew that each subsequent challenge would be more difficult and more scrutinized. The physical fitness test had been about proving she could meet standardized requirements. The advanced training would be about proving she could think, adapt, and perform under pressure. But tonight, for the first time since arriving at Fort Benning, Sarah allowed herself to feel genuinely optimistic about her future. She had transformed from a small woman with a dream into a soldier with documented capabilities. More importantly, she had learned that the most dangerous opponents weren't the ones who tried to intimidate her, but the ones who underestimated her. As she settled into her bunk for another short night of sleep, Sarah's last thought was about the sniper school application packet that would be waiting for her at the end of infantry training. Every test she had passed, every standard she had exceeded, had been preparing her for that ultimate challenge. The journey from rejected recruit to potential sniper was far from over. But Sarah Chen was no longer the same person who had walked into that Seattle recruiting office months earlier. She was becoming something new, a soldier who could fight. The Georgia heat was oppressive even at dawn, as Sarah Chen stepped off the bus at Fort Moore, home to the Army Sniper School. After 18 months of infantry training, airborne school, and ranger preparation, she had finally earned her way to the most elite marksman training in the military. Looking around at her fellow candidates, Sarah realized she was not only the smallest person in the group, but also the only woman. Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, the school's senior instructor, stood before the assembled candidates like a mountain of muscle and experience. His weathered face bore the marks of multiple combat deployments, and his eyes held the sharp focus of someone who had learned that small details could mean the difference between life and death. "Welcome to the hardest 2 months of your military career," Webb began. "Look around you. 64 soldiers started this course last rotation. 22 graduated. The rest either quit, were injured, or were dismissed for failing to meet standards. This school doesn't care about your previous achievements, your test scores, or your recommendations. Here, you either perform or you go home." He paused and let his gaze settle on each candidate. When his eyes reached Sarah, they lingered for a moment longer than the others. "Some of you may be wondering about our standards," Webb continued. "Let me be clear, there are no modified standards, no special consideration, and no participation trophies. Every candidate will meet the same requirements. You will carry the same weight, hit the same targets, and complete the same missions. The enemy doesn't care about your gender, your size, or your personal circumstances. Neither do we." The first week was designed to break the week and weed out candidates who weren't completely committed. Days began at 4 a.m., with physical training that made basic training look like a warm-up. Candidates carried 70-pound packs through swampland, practiced camouflage and concealment in thorn-filled brush, and spent hours learning to control their breathing and heart rate under stress. Sarah had prepared for the physical demands, but nothing had prepared her for the psychological pressure. Every movement was scrutinized, every mistake was documented, and every small failure was amplified by instructors who seemed determined to find reasons to dismiss candidates. During the first shooting assessment, candidates had to engage targets at distances from 100 to 800 meters using standard Army rifles. Sarah had expected this to be her strongest area, but the military shooting requirements were different from civilian competition. Instead of focusing purely on precision, military snipers had to balance accuracy with speed, shooting from uncomfortable positions while wearing full gear. "Chen," Staff Sergeant Webb called out after reviewing her target. "Your group size is acceptable, but your time is too slow. A sniper who takes forever to engage targets is a dead sniper. You need to cut 30 seconds off your engagement time while maintaining the same accuracy." Sarah studied her targets and shooting logs that night, analyzing every aspect of her performance. She realized that her civilian shooting background, while providing excellent marksmanship fundamentals, had emphasized deliberate precision over combat speed. She needed to reprogram her entire shooting process. The second week introduced stalking and fieldcraft, skills that would prove to be Sarah's salvation. Candidates had to move undetected across open terrain while instructors with high-powered scopes searched for them. Being spotted meant automatic failure of the exercise, and points deducted from their overall score. This was where Sarah's small size became a significant advantage. While larger candidates struggled to hide behind sparse vegetation, Sarah could disappear into terrain features that wouldn't conceal a man twice her size. Her movements were naturally quieter, and her smaller equipment footprint made her harder to detect. "Outstanding," Webb admitted after a particularly challenging stalking exercise where Sarah had successfully moved 600 meters across open ground without being detected.
"That was textbook fieldcraft."
Some of you bigger candidates should take notes. But Sarah's success in fieldcraft only increased the scrutiny on her shooting performance. During the precision shooting phase, candidates were required to consistently hit targets at 1,000 meters under various weather conditions. The margin for error was unforgiving. Missing the vital zone by even a few inches meant failure. The pressure was immense. Sarah could feel the weight of expectations from instructors who were waiting for her to fail, fellow candidates who resented her presence, and her own family legacy. Her grandfather's Korean War service meant that failure wasn't just personal, it was a betrayal of everything he had taught her about duty and capability. On the day of the final precision shooting test, conditions were deliberately challenging. A crosswind gusted unpredictably across the range, and targets were partially obscured by heat shimmer. Candidates had one shot at each distance to prove their capability. Sarah lay behind her rifle at the 1,000-meter line, studying the wind patterns through her scope. She had learned to read the environment like a language, interpreting the subtle movements of grass and vegetation to predict wind changes. Her breathing was controlled, her position was stable, and her mind was calm despite the pressure. The target in her scope was a man-sized silhouette with a vital zone roughly the size of a dinner plate. At 1,000 meters, even a small error in wind reading or trigger control would result in a complete miss. Sarah took her final breath, let half of it out, and began her trigger squeeze. The rifle's recoil was familiar and comfortable. Through her scope, Sarah watched the bullet's trace and saw the target marker drop, indicating a hit, but she wouldn't know if it was in the vital zone until the range safety officers checked the target. Target 12, vital zone hit, came the announcement over the radio. Sarah had passed the precision test. The final examination was a comprehensive field exercise that combined all the skills taught throughout the course. Candidates were given a mission to infiltrate enemy territory, gather intelligence, and eliminate high-value targets without being detected. The exercise lasted 72 hours and was conducted with minimal food, water, and rest. Sarah was partnered with Specialist James Rodriguez, a former Marine who had initially been skeptical of her presence in the course. Over the previous weeks, however, he had developed respect for her technical skills and determination. "Look, Chen," Rodriguez said as they prepared their gear for the final exercise, "I'm not going to lie and say I was happy about being partnered with you at first. But you've proven you can carry your weight. Just don't do anything stupid out there that gets us both failed." The mission required them to move 8 kilometers through hostile territory, establish an observation post, and engage multiple targets at various ranges. Intelligence indicated that enemy forces would be actively patrolling the area and searching for infiltrators. Sarah and Rodriguez moved out under cover of darkness, using terrain features and careful route planning to avoid detection. Sarah's navigation skills, honed through years of hunting and hiking, kept them on course without using electronic devices that might give away their position. After 6 hours of careful movement, they reached their designated observation point overlooking the target area. Sarah began setting up her shooting position while Rodriguez established security and communications. The first target wouldn't appear until daylight, giving them several hours to perfect their concealment and confirm their range calculations. As dawn broke, Sarah could see movement in the target area through her scope. The exercise controllers had positioned life-size targets at various distances, some stationary and others on mechanical systems that provided limited movement. Each target had specific engagement windows, and missing the timing meant missing the target entirely. The first target appeared at 600 meters, a relatively easy shot under ideal conditions. But Sarah was firing from an improvised position after moving all night with minimal rest. She controlled her breathing, confirmed her wind reading, and took the shot. The target fell immediately. Over the next several hours, Sarah engaged targets at distances ranging from 400 to 1,200 meters. Each shot required new calculations for wind, distance, and target movement. Between engagements, she and Rodriguez had to remain completely concealed as exercise controllers moved through the area searching for them. The final target was the most challenging, a partially concealed silhouette at 1,100 meters that would only be visible for 30 seconds. Sarah had one opportunity to make the shot before the target disappeared and the exercise ended. As the target became visible, Sarah felt a moment of perfect clarity. All the doubt, criticism, and skepticism from the past months fell away. There was only her, the rifle, and the target. Her finger moved smoothly through the trigger squeeze, and she watched the bullet impact exactly where she had aimed. All targets engaged successfully, Rodriguez confirmed through the radio. Mission complete. When they returned to the school facility, Staff Sergeant Webb was waiting with their final scores. Sarah had not only passed every requirement, but had achieved the second highest overall score in the class. More importantly, she had earned something that couldn't be measured: the respect of her instructors and fellow soldiers. "Chen," Webb said as he handed her the graduation certificate, "I'll admit I had my doubts when you showed up here. I've seen a lot of soldiers try and fail to become snipers, and most of them were bigger and stronger than you. But size isn't what makes a sniper effective. Skill, patience, and mental toughness make a sniper effective. You have all three." That evening, Sarah called her grandfather from the base phone to share the news of her graduation. I knew you could do it, Master Sergeant Kim said, and Sarah could hear the pride in his voice. But remember, graduation is just the beginning. Now comes the real test, using these skills to protect your fellow soldiers and serve your country. As Sarah packed her gear that night, she reflected on the journey from rejected recruit to qualified sniper. Every obstacle had made her stronger, every doubt had motivated her to work harder, and every small victory had built the confidence she would need for the challenges ahead. Tomorrow she would receive her first assignment as a qualified sniper. Somewhere in the world there were soldiers who might one day depend on her skills to keep them alive. The thought was both humbling and inspiring. Sarah Chen was no longer just a small woman with exceptional shooting skills. She was a United States Army sniper, trained to the highest standards and ready to serve wherever her country needed her. The real test of her abilities was still ahead, but she had proven that she belonged among the elite marksmen of the world's most powerful military. The helicopter's rotors beat against the thin mountain air as Sarah Chen stared out at the rugged landscape of eastern Afghanistan. 3 years had passed since her graduation from sniper school, and she had deployed twice to combat zones. But this mission felt different. The intelligence briefing had been unusually detailed, the security classification was higher than normal, and the unit she was supporting was Navy SEALs rather than regular Army infantry. Staff Sergeant Chen, as she was now known, adjusted her gear one final time as the helicopter began its descent towards Forward Operating Base Chapman. Her sniper rifle, a customized M2010 enhanced sniper rifle, was secured in its drag bag alongside enough ammunition and equipment to sustain her for a week-long mission. At 110 pounds, she still looked small next to the other soldiers on the helicopter, but her reputation had preceded her to Afghanistan. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Martinez, the base commander, met Sarah personally upon her arrival. This level of attention from senior officers was unusual for a staff sergeant, but Sarah had earned a reputation as one of the Army's most effective snipers during her previous deployments. Sergeant Chen, Martinez said as they walked toward the operations center, I'm sure you're wondering why we specifically requested you for this mission. The truth is, we have a situation that requires someone with your particular skill set. The operations center was a hive of activity, with intelligence analysts studying satellite imagery and communications specialists monitoring enemy radio traffic. On the main display screen was a topographical map of the Hindu Kush Mountains, marked with various colored symbols indicating friendly and enemy positions. 3 days ago, Martinez continued, a Navy SEAL reconnaissance team was inserted into this valley to gather intelligence on a high-value target. The team went dark yesterday morning, and we believe they're trapped in this area. She pointed to a narrow canyon system roughly 30 kilometers from the base. Major James Thompson, the SEAL liaison officer, stepped forward to continue the briefing. Our boys are good, Sergeant, but they're outnumbered and surrounded. Initial drone reconnaissance shows at least 50 enemy fighters in the area, with more arriving every hour. The terrain makes a helicopter extraction impossible, and a ground rescue would result in significant casualties on both sides. Sarah studied the map carefully, noting the elevation changes, vegetation patterns, and potential fields of fire. The valley was a natural trap, with high ridgelines on both sides and limited escape routes. It was exactly the type of terrain where a skilled sniper could be most effective. What's the mission, sir? Sarah asked. Overwatch and precision fire support, Thompson replied. We're going to position you on this ridgeline here, approximately 1,200 meters from the valley floor. Your job is to provide covering fire while a small rescue team moves in to extract our people. The enemy doesn't know you're coming, which gives us the element of surprise. Sarah nodded, already calculating distances and angles in her head. The shot distances would be at the extreme end of her weapon system's effective range, complicated by the thin air at high altitude and unpredictable mountain winds. It would require every skill she had developed over years of training and combat experience. There's one more thing, Martinez added. Intelligence indicates that one of the enemy commanders in the valley is Hamza al-Rashid, a high-value target we've been tracking for months. If you get the opportunity for a clean shot, you're authorized to take it. The mission launched at 0200 hours under a moonless sky. Sarah moved with a small team of rangers who would provide security while she established her shooting position. The approach to the ridgeline required a 12-hour movement through some of the most treacherous terrain in Afghanistan. Sergeant First Class Mike Davidson, the ranger team leader, had worked with Sarah on a previous mission and understood her capabilities. Chen, I know you've done this before, but this one feels different. These mountains make everything harder. Distances are deceptive, winds are unpredictable, and the altitude is going to affect both you and your equipment. Sarah appreciated his concern, but she had been preparing for this type of mission her entire career. The high-altitude environment was challenging, but it also provided advantages. The thinner air meant less wind drift over long distances, and the clear mountain atmosphere provided excellent visibility for target identification. As they climbed toward the ridgeline, Sarah's thoughts turned to the trapped SEAL team. She had never worked directly with Navy SEALs, but she knew their reputation. If they were calling for help, the situation was desperate. The weight of their lives rested on her ability to place accurate fire at extreme range under combat conditions. The team reached the ridgeline just before dawn, and Sarah immediately began establishing her shooting position. She selected a location that provided clear fields of fire into the valley while offering concealment from enemy observation. Using her rangefinder and ballistic calculator, she began plotting distances to key terrain features and potential target areas. Through her high-powered spotting scope, Sarah could see movement in the valley below. Enemy fighters were positioned behind rocks and in cave entrances, creating what military tacticians call a kill zone for anyone attempting to enter or leave the valley. Somewhere in that maze of rocks and vegetation were 4 Navy SEALs fighting for their lives. Overwatch, this is Rescue 1, came the radio call from the extraction team. We're in position and ready to move. Do you have eyes on the target area? Sarah keyed her radio. Rescue 1, Overwatch has visual on multiple enemy positions throughout the valley. Count at least 30 fighters visible, with more likely concealed. Be advised, this is going to be hot. Roger, Overwatch. We're beginning our approach. Request you engage targets of opportunity to suppress enemy fire. Sarah settled behind her rifle and began scanning for her first target. At 1,200 meters, individual soldiers appeared as small figures through her scope, but years of experience had taught her to identify threatening positions and prioritize targets. Her first shot needed to be perfect, both to eliminate a threat and to announce to the enemy that they were no longer safe in their concealed positions. A muzzle flash from a rocky outcropping caught her attention. An enemy machine gunner was firing down into the valley, trying to pin down the SEAL team. Sarah estimated the range at 1,180 meters, adjusted for the crosswind she could see moving the vegetation below, and took aim. The shot felt perfect as it left the rifle. Through her scope, Sarah watched the enemy gunner suddenly stop firing and slump forward. The suppressed report of her rifle meant that the other enemy fighters wouldn't immediately know where the shot had come from. Good hit, Overwatch, came the radio call from the spotting team watching through binoculars. Enemy machine gun is down. Multiple targets are moving to new positions. Over the next 30 minutes, Sarah engaged 8 different targets as the rescue team fought their way into the valley. Each shot required new calculations for distance, wind, and target movement. The psychological effect of precise sniper fire was as important as the physical casualties. Enemy fighters became reluctant to expose themselves, reducing their effectiveness against the rescue team. Overwatch, this is Rescue 1. The radio crackled with urgency. We have located the package, but we're taking heavy fire from a building complex at Grid 41S, Maryland 12345678890. Can you engage? Sarah swung her scope toward the coordinates and immediately identified the problem. A group of enemy fighters had fortified themselves in a stone building that provided excellent cover and fields of fire. The rescue team was pinned down in the open, unable to advance or retreat. The building was at the extreme range of Sarah's weapon system, nearly 1,300 meters away. The shot would require perfect calculation of ballistics, wind conditions, and target identification. More challenging, she needed to hit specific individuals inside the building, without hitting the stone walls that protected them. Through her scope, Sarah could see muzzle flashes from windows and doorways as the enemy fighters fired down at the rescue team. She selected a target in the main doorway, a figure who appeared to be directing the others' fire. This was likely a leader or experienced fighter whose elimination would disrupt the enemy's coordination. Sarah made her final adjustments for distance and wind, controlled her breathing, and began her trigger squeeze. The shot was at the very limit of her abilities and equipment, requiring trust in years of training and experience. The bullet's flight time at that distance was nearly 2 seconds. Sarah watched through her scope as the target suddenly spun and fell backward into the building. Almost immediately, the volume of fire from the building decreased significantly. Outstanding shot, Overwatch, came the excited radio call. Enemy fire is suppressed. We're moving to extract the package now. But as the rescue team began their movement toward the trapped SEALs, Sarah noticed new movement on the valley floor. Through her scope, she could see a group of fighters moving toward a position that would allow them to cut off the rescue team's escape route. Among them was a figure who moved with the confidence and authority of a senior leader. Sarah studied the figure through her scope and compared him to the photographs she had memorized during the mission briefing. The facial features, body structure, and movement patterns all matched the target profile for Hamza al-Rashid, the high-value target they had been seeking. The shot distance was over 1,400 meters, well beyond the normal effective range of her weapon system. The target was moving, requiring her to calculate lead time in addition to all the other ballistic factors. This was the type of shot that even experienced snipers would consider nearly impossible. But Sarah also knew that opportunities like this were rare in warfare. If al-Rashid escaped, he would continue to plan attacks against coalition forces and Afghan civilians. The lives that could be saved by eliminating him now outweighed the low probability of success. Sarah tracked the target through her scope, noting his movement pattern and speed. She had one opportunity as he moved through a small clearing before reaching cover. The shot would require leading the target by nearly 6 feet to account for his movement and the bullet's flight time. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her final calculations and began tracking the target's movement. As al-Rashid entered the clearing, she smoothly moved her point of aim to where he would be when the bullet arrived and pressed the trigger. The wait seemed endless. At extreme range, the bullet's supersonic crack would reach the target area nearly a second before the bullet itself. Sarah watched through her scope as al-Rashid suddenly stopped moving and collapsed to the ground. "Holy shit, Overwatch," came the radio call from her spotter. "I can't believe you just made that shot. Target is down and not moving." The elimination of al-Rashid had an immediate effect on enemy morale. Fighters began abandoning their positions and retreating from the valley, allowing the rescue team to extract the SEAL team without further casualties. Overwatch. This is Rescue 1. We have the package and are moving to the extraction point. Your fire support was outstanding. 4 American lives are going home because of you. As Sarah began packing her equipment for the long movement back to base, she reflected on the mission. The shots had been at the extreme limit of human and equipment capability, but the results spoke for themselves. 4 Navy SEALs were alive, a high-value target had been eliminated, and a significant enemy force had been disrupted. More importantly, Sarah had proven that size and gender were irrelevant when skill, training, and determination were applied correctly. The enemy fighters in the valley hadn't cared about her gender when her bullets found their targets. Her fellow soldiers hadn't questioned her capabilities when the mission succeeded. That night, as she cleaned her rifle and prepared her after-action report, Sarah received a message that would change her career trajectory. The Pentagon wanted to interview her for a new special operations unit that was being formed. The mission in Afghanistan had demonstrated capabilities that senior military leaders wanted to study and replicate. But for now, Sarah was content to be a soldier who had done her job well. Somewhere, 4 Navy SEALs were calling their families to say they were safe. That was worth more than any medal or promotion. The Pentagon briefing room was unlike any military facility Sarah Chen had ever entered. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, and the walls were lined with portraits of American military heroes dating back to the Revolutionary War. As a newly promoted Sergeant First Class, Sarah felt somewhat out of place among the generals, admirals, and senior defense officials who filled the room. General Patricia Williams, the first female Army Chief of Staff, stood at the head of the conference table reviewing a classified document. When she looked up at Sarah, there was a mixture of professional assessment and genuine curiosity in her eyes. "Sergeant First Class Chen," General Williams began, "your actions in Afghanistan have created quite a stir in the special operations community. A confirmed kill at 1,427 meters under combat conditions is remarkable by any standard. But what's more impressive is the tactical impact of your performance. 4 Navy SEALs are alive because of your skills." Sarah remained at attention, unsure of how to respond to praise from such a senior officer. In her experience, being called to meetings with generals was usually bad news for enlisted soldiers. "At ease, Sergeant," Williams continued. "You're here because we want to offer you an opportunity that doesn't officially exist yet. Are you familiar with the concept of precision engagement teams?" "No, ma'am," Sarah replied honestly. Colonel Marcus Stone, a Special Forces officer sitting to the general's left, opened a folder and spread several photographs across the table. The images showed various combat scenarios, urban environments, mountain terrain, and dense jungle. "Modern warfare is evolving," Stone explained. "Our enemies have learned to hide among civilian populations, use complex terrain to their advantage, and exploit our reluctance to cause collateral damage. Traditional military responses often result in excessive casualties or limited effectiveness. We need surgical precision." General Williams took over the presentation. "We're forming a new unit called the Special Applications Sniper Program. Small teams of highly skilled marksmen who can eliminate specific threats without the massive footprint of conventional military operations. Think of it as a scalpel rather than a sledgehammer. Sarah was beginning to understand why she had been brought to Washington. Her success in Afghanistan hadn't just been noticed, it had influenced military strategy at the highest levels. The program is highly classified, Williams continued, and participation is voluntary. Selected personnel would receive advanced training in urban sniping, extreme long-range engagements, and unconventional warfare tactics. Missions would involve supporting special operations forces worldwide, often in situations where conventional military action isn't feasible. Colonel Stone leaned forward. Sergeant Chen, your performance demonstrates exactly the type of capabilities we're seeking. Exceptional marksmanship combined with tactical intelligence and the ability to operate independently under extreme pressure. You would be among the first soldiers selected for this program. The opportunity was everything Sarah had dreamed of when she first walked into that Seattle recruiting office years earlier. Advanced training, cutting-edge equipment, and missions that would push her skills to their absolute limits. But she also understood the implications of what was being offered. General Williams, Sarah said carefully, if I may ask, why me specifically? There are other snipers with more experience and higher profile achievements. Williams smiled. Good question. The answer is complicated, but it comes down to something you demonstrated in Afghanistan that can't be taught: adaptability. When your spotting team analyzed the ballistic data from your 1.427-meter shot, they discovered something interesting. The environmental conditions were so challenging that your shot should have missed by several feet. But somehow, you compensated for factors that weren't in any manual. She paused and looked directly at Sarah. When they asked you about it during the debrief, you said you felt the shot was right. That kind of intuitive understanding of ballistics and environmental factors is extremely rare. We want to study how you do what you do and train others to develop similar capabilities. Sarah realized that her acceptance into this program would mean more than personal advancement. She would be helping to develop the next generation of military precision shooters, potentially saving countless lives through improved training and tactics. There's one more thing, Colonel Stone added. This program would involve working closely with civilian contractors, foreign military units, and intelligence agencies. You would need to obtain a top-secret security clearance and agree to an extended service commitment. The missions won't always be in official combat zones, and the work won't always be publicized. Sarah understood that this was a polite way of saying that her future missions might involve activities that the government would never acknowledge publicly. It was a significant commitment that would define the rest of her military career. How long do I have to decide? Sarah asked. Take the weekend to think about it, General Williams replied. But understand that this opportunity won't be available indefinitely. We're selecting a very small number of personnel for the initial program, and your slot could be offered to someone else if you decline. That evening, Sarah walked through Arlington National Cemetery, thinking about the decision she faced. Among the countless white headstones were the graves of soldiers who had made the ultimate sacrifice in service to their country. Many had been young people who had volunteered for dangerous missions knowing that they might not survive. She called her grandfather from a bench overlooking the tomb of the unknown soldier. Sarah, Master Sergeant Kim said after she had explained the offer, this is what we prepared for your entire life. Every shooting lesson, every conversation about duty and service has been leading to this moment. But grandfather, Sarah replied, I'm not sure I'm ready for this level of responsibility. What if I make a mistake? What if I fail when it really matters? There was a long pause before her grandfather responded. You know, after I came back from Korea, I spent a lot of time thinking about the men I killed. Not because I felt guilty, but because I wanted to honor their sacrifice by making sure their deaths meant something. Every enemy soldier I eliminated was someone who couldn't harm my fellow Marines or innocent civilians. He paused again. Sarah, you have a gift. You can place a bullet exactly where it needs to go when it needs to be there. That gift comes with responsibility, but it also comes with the opportunity to save lives that nobody else can save. Don't waste that opportunity because you're afraid of the responsibility. That weekend, Sarah also spoke with the Navy SEALs she had saved in Afghanistan. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison had reached out through official channels to thank her personally for her actions during the rescue mission. Sergeant Chen, Morrison said during their phone conversation, I want you to understand something. When my team was trapped in that valley, we thought we were going to die there. We had accepted it. And then your first shot rang out and suddenly the whole tactical situation changed. You gave us hope when we had none. He continued, I don't know what opportunities you're considering for your future, but I want you to know that there are 4 families in Virginia Beach who will never forget what you did for us. Our wives and children are grateful for a level of skill and dedication that most people can't comprehend. On Monday morning, Sarah returned to the Pentagon with her decision. General Williams was waiting in the same briefing room, along with Colonel Stone and several other officials she hadn't met previously. "General Williams," Sarah said formally, "I accept the assignment to the Special Applications Sniper Program." Williams nodded approvingly. "Outstanding. Your training begins in 2 weeks at an undisclosed location. You'll be working with some of the most advanced weapon systems and technologies the military has ever developed. More importantly, you'll be helping to establish the standards and procedures that will define precision engagement for the next generation of American snipers." The next several months were the most challenging and rewarding of Sarah's military career. The training program combined traditional sniper skills with cutting-edge technology, urban warfare tactics, and international law. She learned to engage targets in crowded cities without risking civilian casualties, to operate in hostile countries without official military support, and to coordinate with intelligence agencies from multiple nations. Her first operational mission came 6 months later in a Middle Eastern country that the government would never officially acknowledge. A terrorist leader responsible for multiple attacks against American interests had been located in an urban safehouse, but conventional military action would result in significant civilian casualties and international complications. Sarah's mission was simple in concept, but extraordinarily difficult in execution. Eliminate the target with a single shot from over 800 meters, while he was surrounded by innocent civilians in a densely populated urban environment. The shot required days of preparation, studying the target's movement patterns, environmental conditions, and civilian activity in the area. When the opportunity finally came, Sarah had less than 10 seconds to identify the target, confirm there were no civilians in the potential impact area, and take the shot. The bullet traveled 847 meters through urban air currents, past building corners and through a narrow window opening to strike the target with surgical precision. The mission was completed without any civilian casualties or international incidents. Over the next 3 years, Sarah would complete 17 similar missions in 8 different countries. Each operation saved lives, prevented terrorist attacks, or eliminated threats that conventional military forces couldn't address effectively. But perhaps more importantly, Sarah's techniques and innovations were incorporated into training programs throughout the military. Her methods for reading environmental conditions, calculating complex ballistics, and maintaining psychological stability under pressure became standard curriculum for American snipers. When Sarah finally retired from the military after 12 years of service, her official record showed a successful career as a sniper and instructor. What it didn't show were the countless lives saved by her precision, the terrorist attacks prevented by her actions, and the tactical innovations that had advanced American military capabilities. At her retirement ceremony, General Williams, now the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, presented Sarah with a Distinguished Service Medal. "Sergeant Major Chen," Williams said, "when you first walked into a recruiting office as a small woman with big dreams, nobody could have predicted the impact you would have on American military capabilities. You didn't just exceed expectations, you redefined what was possible." As Sarah stood before the assembled military officials and fellow soldiers, she thought about the long journey from rejection to recognition. Every obstacle had made her stronger. Every doubt had motivated her to excellence, and every success had opened doors for others who would follow. In the audience, her grandfather sat in his wheelchair, wearing his Korean War veteran cap and the same proud expression he had worn at every milestone of her life. Master Sergeant James Kim had lived to see his granddaughter become everything he had taught her she could be. After the ceremony, as Sarah cleaned out her office, she found a letter that had been delivered earlier that day. It was from a young woman in California who had just enlisted in the Army with the goal of becoming a sniper. "Sergeant Major Chen," the letter read, "my recruiter told me about your career and said that if someone like you could succeed as a sniper, maybe I could too. I'm not very big either, and people keep telling me I should consider other career fields. But you proved that size doesn't matter if you have the skill and determination. Thank you for showing me what's possible." Sarah smiled as she folded the letter and put it in her personal files. The cycle was continuing. Somewhere, another small woman was fighting for the opportunity to serve her country at the highest level, inspired by the example of someone who had faced the same doubts and overcome them. The rejected recruit had become a legend, but more importantly, she had become proof that American military excellence comes in all sizes, shapes, and genders. In a world where precision and skill matter more than physical intimidation, Sarah Chen had shown that the most dangerous weapon was not the biggest soldier, but the most capable one. Her story would inspire future generations of soldiers who didn't fit the traditional military profile but possessed the heart, skill, and determination to excel at the highest levels of military service. Sometimes the most powerful statement is made, not with words, but with results that speak for themselves.